What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the mono white token control deck in Standard. It's a very solid counterpick to the various different mid-range decks and a lot of the aggro decks in the format. It gets to abuse some of the really good removal that white has access to, along with a lot of the great options for slowing down those aggro decks and forcing them to play in the mid to late game, where admittedly they are pretty weak, and if you are kind of in tune with what is going on in the format, kind of how this mono white deck wants to kind of play those control games, it ends up being kind of a trivial end game and just trying to figure out a way to close out the game before you end up going to time and trying to hopefully win game one, whatever the case may be. But before we get too deep into the mono white token control deck and we talk about the ins and outs and exactly what it's doing to great effect, honestly, to kind of combat the aggro slash mid-range decks of the format, if you're already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we post a lot of content based on the Standard, Modern, and Pioneer format, as well as some other longer form videos for your viewing entertainment. So if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a pretty easy way to support me and my content, and if you'd like to go even further, you can go down in the description below. You can go join my Discord server, you can go check out the Casual Spikes podcast, or meet my co-host Randy over at Randy, talk about the current RCQ season and do some different things. We even just recently started doing some gameplay, and we have a few matches from some of the more popular decks of the Standard format on that channel. So if you want to go check that out, go ahead and jump over there, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Lastly, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders, for sponsoring us. They are a subscription-based service to where month to month you can get a different rental limit and you can rent whatever decks you want to play. If you see anything that on this channel that you enjoy, you can use my code down in the description below, sign up for Manatraders and get 5% off for a monthly subscription. With all the way, let's go ahead, let's talk about mono white token control, because this is kind of different from like the control decks in like a traditional sense. So normally with like the different control decks, or usually when people talk about playing control, they're talking about counter spells and getting tempo and things. This deck kind of takes it in a different way, where we're not playing blue. We don't really need any of the counter spells or anything like that. We just play a lot of spells that kind of get us tempo, and we can generate a bunch of advantage over the course of a long game, where our opponents ideally is going to run out of gas, and we're just going to be able to keep putting a bunch of tokens on the board. We're going to be able to keep just putting objects onto the board that our opponent is going to have a hard time beating. When eventually they've spent all of their cards, we're just going to again keep accruing some value. So how exactly do we do this? Well, it says card Caretaker's Talent. So for 3 mana, it doesn't do anything. So like normally when you have a 3 mana enchantment that doesn't technically do anything, the turn it comes into play, it ends up being pretty bad, but Caretaker's Talent is just going to get so many miles put on it. So for 3 mana, whenever one or more tokens you control enters the battlefield, draw a card. This ability triggers only one each turn. So if you can find a way to make tokens on your turn as well as your opponent's turn, which there'll be a few cards that we'll talk about that can do that, you're able to trigger this thing and essentially draw a card, an extra card every turn. For a single white mana, when this class becomes level 2, you create a token that's a copy of target token you control. So if your opponent ends up killing the token or getting rid of the token, whatever the case may be, before this actually gets to resolve, then you don't get to make a copy of the token, you don't get the trigger or anything like that. Which, of note, if you have a Caretaker's Talent, you can copy like treasure token or something like that. You could see this copy some other kind of token like Pioneer, whatever the case may be. This doesn't have to necessarily be a creature token, so you can then copy a treasure or whatever and end up drawing a card, because that's you creating a token, or like a token entering the battlefield. So really neat there. And then for 4 mana, creature tokens you control get +2/+2, and you'll see that there is a few ways for us to kind of do that. One of the big ways of trying to triggering Caretaker's Talent and really getting the most out of this card is Carrot Cake, an all-star in Bloomburrow Draft. I absolutely love playing this card in Bloomburrow Draft, and even like Sealed, but this card's great. 2 mana, when it enters the battlefield or you sacrifice it, you create a 1/1 rabbit creature token and you scry 1. So with how this actually ends up working, you make a 1/1 and scry 1, so you're resolving the effect. And then once you resolve the effect of Carrot Cake, you're going to be able to trigger the Caretaker's Talent to then draw a card. So this is like a way that for 2 mana with a Caretaker's Talent out, you're going to make a 1/1, scry 1, and then you're going to be able to draw a card. And then this is a way that you can kind of help trigger your Caretaker's Talent on your opponent's turn by paying 2 mana, sacrificing the Carrot Cake, gaining 3 life, which again is something that's also really valuable against the plethora of aggro decks that we see in the format. Then, of course, you're going to get to redo this all over again. You're going to make another 1/1. You're going to be able to scry 1, and then you're going to be able to draw a card from Caretaker's Talent. This also isn't really a bad thing to kind of copy a 1/1 with Caretaker's Talent. There's not very many tokens that you're going to end up making that you really want to copy anyway with Caretaker's Talent. So this is like a really good one to kind of target. And this all comes into one card. It's eventually going to find you other Carrot Cakes. It's going to allow you to gain more life. It's going to allow you to get some more kind of like card selection as well as card advantage in conjunction with Caretaker's Talent. So this is kind of like the fun part of the deck. So ideally, you have cards like Carrot Cake that are going to make tokens, and they're going to end up kind of getting you this advantage. Another way you can do it, and another way that Carrot Cake can get you some card advantage, is also with the card Enduring Innocence. Now, we see this a lot in like green-white decks in Pioneer, where they kind of play like this Hate Bear strategy, or even like with other kind of like small creature decks. Enduring Innocence works out very well in this deck because well, if it dies, it just comes back to the battlefield as an enchantment, which means that if you get a block with this, you gain some life, stop some damage, and then this just comes back. You still end up getting the effects of Enduring Innocence, which says whenever one or more other creatures you control with power 2 or greater enter, you draw a card, and this ability only triggers 1 turn. So you can imagine having like a Caretaker's Talent and playing an Enduring Innocence, and just from there getting to, again, play Carrot Cakes. You do play 4 Fountain Port in the deck, so you can then kind of pay life to make a fish, or even make a treasure token, whatever the case may be. You're going to draw a card off the Caretaker's Talent, you're going to draw a card off the Enduring Innocence, all just from like your mana base, ideally. So this is like a way that, you can, again, generate some card advantage, kind of dig towards some of the other spells you're looking for, which when we talk about playing against aggro decks, you want to find things like Biza, where when it enters, you create a treasure token. If your opponent controls more lands than you gain 4 life if the opponent has more life. You make fish if they control, you make 2 fish if they control more creatures than you. Draw a card if the opponent has more cards than you in hand. This is really good against the aggro decks because, again, you're more than likely they're going to have more creatures than you on the battlefield. So you're going to make fish. It's going to trigger your Enduring Innocence, your Caretaker's Talent. More than likely, they're going to have more life than you, so you're going to gain 4 life. So a lot of the time, Biza is just a 4-mana 4/5, a really hard creature to attack through. That's going to put 2 fish on the battlefield, forcing your opponent to have some sort of way to give their creatures trample. And then you're also going to gain 4 life, which is going to be a nice little buffer. We're not going to act like 4 life is the end of the world against some of the aggro decks, even gaining like 7 or 10 life with the amount of damage that they are able to put out. But nonetheless, that is still a lot of life to gain and can sometimes give you a few extra turns to set up some of these other spells. Before we touch on those, though, Overlord of the Mistmoors is definitely a go big creature that can just, again, kind of help you in the card advantage department when you have Innocence or Caretaker's Talent or multiple of them out on the battlefield. Because when it enters or attacks, you're going to create 2 1/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. So they're going to enter the battlefield. You're only going to be able to trigger them once. So, Caretaker's Talent and Enduring Innocence are only going to draw you 2 cards, even though you have 2 tokens entering the simultaneously. But if you're able to play Mistmoors for 7 mana, which again this deck excels at getting to the mid to late game, especially against the different aggro decks and the different mid-range decks of the format. So just getting to make 2 2/1 flyers and then also getting a 6/6, and the 6/6 more than likely is going to be able to attack mostly unchecked, even if your opponent is able to block it, and the amount of removal spells that you play, you are able to just kind of keep chunking in for damage and making more tokens, making it a lot harder for your opponent to attack, drawing more cards, and just forever increasing the chances that your opponent is not going to be able to catch up once we kind of get to this mid that the white deck wants to play. We have an Archangel Elspeth, also makes tokens, so her +1 is going to allow you to draw cards. 4 mana for 4 mana for a Foility Planeswalker that's going to go up to 5 on your next turn is still really good. Even the -2 ability, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It becomes an angel in addition to other types and gains flying. Imagine Biza taking to the skies, a 6/7 flyer is going to close out a game very quickly, or at least plays defense very, very well in order for your opponent to really have a hard time attacking through and then eventually just closing out the game really quick, which this deck does kind of struggle to do if it can't keep a Biza or an Overlord of the play. Her other ability, return all non-land permanents from mana value 3 less from your graveyard to the battlefield, can be really good when you consider that we're playing, Carrot Cake is a really good one to come back. Caretaker's Talents that end up hitting the graveyard, Enduring Innocences that your opponent is able to get rid of the enchantment half, which is probably more or less likely going to happen in like the Golgari decks. And interestingly enough, this card, a Clay Fried Bricks, which is a pretty interesting addition because this allows you to search for essentially your third land, go get a basic plains, put it in your hand, shuffle, you gain 2 life. And on the flip side of it, you can make 2 1/1 colorless gnomes, and then it has a Lord type, or excuse me, an Anthem effect of giving your creatures +1/+1. And again, that's like another way that this deck can close out the game very quickly if it needs to. The spells, how are we getting to the late game? We have Lay Down Arms is essentially just a 1 mana like exile effect, essentially like a Swords to Plowshares. So you're going to get to exile a creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. Its controller gains 3 life. That's why you see 18 planes in this deck, and then we have 3 Citadel and 4 Fountain Port. The Citadel helping us to activate the abilities on Fountain Port. The fact that you can pay to sacrifice a token to draw a card means that any of your potential treasure tokens that you make off the Fountain Port, any of the 1/1s, 2/1s, or whatever the case may be, that enter play, you're going to be able to draw cards from them entering the battlefield, and then Fountain Port is also going to allow you to sacrifice them to get some more card advantage, as well as whatever tokens that your opponent could give you, because there's also people playing Get Lost that is going to destroy a creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Its controller creates 2 map tokens, which means that if your opponent plays a Get Lost against you, you can start making map tokens and drawing those. Or you can, if you really get desperate, you can use them on some of your own things just to kind of create tokens, draw cards, and potentially turn those map tokens again into more cards with the activation of Fountain Port, or even just using the maps to buff up some of your own creatures. Not the ideal way and not the intention of this card, but that is something that you can keep in mind if you just need to kind of draw some cards. You're not really worried about what your opponent has going on the battlefield, but you're more or less just trying to kind of get to the point where, again, you're finding like a win condition to hopefully close out the game very quickly and not get into a position where you're going to either draw or end up losing and close out a game when you win the first game. We have Soul Partition, which is a weird card. You exile target non-land permanent, so it's essentially removal in the sense that you're going to be able to take something off the board completely, no matter what it is, and for as long as the card remains exiled, its owner may play it. A spell cast by an opponent this way costs 2 more to cast, so you can use this as a weird protection spell for some own things, where if your opponent's going to blow up an Overlord because they have like some sort of enchantment removal, or even getting rid of your Enduring Innocence, you are able to Soul Partition it to protect it, and then the spell is going to cost its mana cost if you play it, and if your opponent plays it, say if they have like a Manifold Mouse or whatever, they're gonna have to spend 4 mana on that Manifold Mouse, which is a lot of tempo. And honestly, if that's all your opponent really has going on is to kind of replay their card for 4 or 5 mana, you're in a pretty happy situation, because again, like, that just gained you so much tempo and is like really a blowout when players start to like pile on their pump spells and stuff like that onto a single creature. Finally, we have Sunfall and Split Up. Sunfall is kind of like I would say the go-to for a lot of the white-based decks. You see this a lot in Domain. You see it here in the mono white deck. 4 copies of this. Exile all creatures, incubate X, where X is the number of creatures exiled this way. This also creates a token, obviously, allows you to draw cards from Caretaker's Talent, and a little bit of a nombo with Enduring Innocence, but really in the grand scheme of things, like, you're wiping the board, you're more than likely making like at least a 5/5 or a 6/6 creature. You don't have to worry about like the death trigger from Heartfire Hero. And then if your opponent does have like the ability to kind of get creatures back, maybe you're playing against some kind of like Reanimator strategy, Sunfall is able to get rid of those creatures completely, and you're kind of forcing your opponent to set back up in that way. There's just a million and one things that this card kind of does that, it's already good, just exiling creatures, like what it does is good, but what is even good, like what people are playing in the context of the format, makes Sunfall an even better and a more attractive card to play than maybe something like Day of Judgment. So pretty interesting there. Split Up, destroy all tapped creatures or all untapped creatures. This is kind of a nice card, because you can, if you get to the point where you're attacking, you can attack with a bunch of creatures, your opponent blocks, then you're okay, now I'm able to cast like a one-sided Wrath. It's also kind of one-sided in the other direction too, where your opponent attacks with all their creatures, you end up blocking with a few of your tokens, and then you're able to cast a Split Up, destroy all tapped creatures, your opponent's board gone, and then you can get in a big attack as well. So I mean, pretty interesting. Of course, you can also, again, in either case, you're able to kind of make this one-sided for your opponent. So this is a pretty good answer to this, rather than playing something like an Authority, or playing like main deck Authority of the Consuls, or Temporary Lockdown. That's a little more popular. Sideboard, we see the Authority of the Consuls in there. Really good against the aggro deck. Same with Elspeth's Smite. It's like a way to just make sure that you can get rid of creatures. They get exiled. You know, really nice there for 1 mana. Exercise, getting rid of some annoying artifact enchantments or some big creatures. Rest in peace for the graveyard decks. The second split up in the sideboard, as well as the fourth Pizza, which again is something that's really good against the aggro decks. And that is the mono white tokens deck for the standard format. This is a really interesting deck. Its biggest problem a lot of the time is if it is not able to adequately control the game and you end up losing game 1, you are absolutely on a race to clock to win game 2 and game 3. Now, this deck does have the capability of doing that. Overlord of Mistmores can help close out a game very quickly. Biza is a very annoying card, but is also a very big card that you can just play, being a 4/5, and then once you kind of clear the way for it, it can start chunking in there for a bit of damage. But between, you know, the little bit of life gain that you kind of give your opponent, plus, again, if they're able to kind of put pressure on you, there is a chance that you don't really get to establish control or anything like that early enough to where you're at a low enough life total to where you need to have multiple answers at a time and you're not able to kind of set up your caretaker's talent, start getting in some card advantage. Same thing with Enduring Innocence. You really want to, you know, eventually turn these cards. You want to invest these resources and be able to kind of get your cards back by kind of chaining them together, where you play a carrot cake with a caretaker's talent and Enduring Innocence out. You're going to scry 1, and then you're going to get to draw 2 cards off of these, and then hopefully set up where you can crack it to then draw another 2 cards, gain some life, make another token, and just kind of keep things rolling to the point where, again, you're just going to get your opponent down to like 2 or 3 cards in hand. You're going to be with a full grip of cards, you know, every single turn cycle, and you're going to be able to leaf up the instant speed interaction while also threatening the board wipes. If your opponent is not able to or isn't willing to commit more to the board, you're able to take them out with the spot removal. And if they just kind of dump their hand and say, all right, I have to go for it, then you can kind of blow them out by, you know, them only getting in so much damage, maybe setting up a swing for next turn where you're just going to Sunfall, again, get to draw some more cards and have a big creature that you're able to kind of flip and block with if your opponent ends up playing a pretty big creature. But yeah, that's the mono white tokens deck for standard. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what you think of the mono white tokens deck, what other decks you'd like to see. I think there's going to be a few other ones that we're going to take a look at before the end of the year. So be on the lookout for those. Stay tuned for more standard content as we kind of chug through the holiday season, go through some of the other RCQs and some of the other big events that are going on Magic Online, and get ready for the new year as we hopefully get some good news later in like the next few weeks if Modern actually gets fixed or not. So, you know, be sure on the lookout for that. Of course, subscribe to the channel, all that fun stuff. And that's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next one.